How are we going to get out of this economic mess? It is absolutely strangling America. We need jobs, and a recent uptake in the unemployment rate should set your hair on fire, because that is simply the wrong direction. President Obama is talking about job creation, but is he getting real results? Senator John McCain says he has an idea. But first, we asked Senator McCain about a lawsuit against President Obama over the U.S. role in Libya. Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Does the president need authorization from Congress to proceed further with Libya?
I think it would be important that he do so.
Required to?
I think that every president has said that they don't respect the constitutionality of the War Powers Act, but they've always complied with it. He should comply with it. And there's a lot of ill will here that he went to the Arab League and NATO and the UN without coming to Congress. So I think it would be very beneficial if he came to Congress, and we had passed a resolution that said we approve of not sending ground troops, but not prohibit, because that would be unconstitutional. Let me also say, the president has made a mess of this situation by not sending U.S. air power, by not declaring a no-fly zone when it counted, by not recognizing this Transition National Council as the legitimate voice of the Libyan people, and a number of other mistakes. But Gaddafi is crumbling, and I believe he will go.
As I understand your view, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would do more than he is doing currently in Libya. Your criticism is of his message, that his sort of puzzling message, I think was the word you used on the floor, and because he went elsewhere and didn't come here to get to sort of, he has a grace period. If you accept the War Powers Resolution, he does have a grace period, but that grace period is now ending.
Yes, and on a practical side, to say that NATO will do it, there's 28 countries in NATO, there's 7 of them actually in the fight, including the Germans not being in the fight. The fact is that we are supporting these other air assets with assets that they don't have. But most importantly, we could have gotten the job done with the use of U.S. air assets rather than relying on our allies who simply don't have the capabilities that we do. If the president says Gaddafi has to go, then we ought to at least do from the air what would hasten his departure.
Why are we there, or why are we helping NATO? I mean, what do you get out of it? Because, you know, every night we report about what's going on in Mexico, which is a lot closer, and we're not devoting nearly at least the same resources. And I realize there's a different situation in Mexico, but why Libya?
Well, first of all, the Libyan people rose up against a brutal dictator who has the blood of 90-some American families on his hands, the bombing of Pan Am 103. They were about to be slaughtered as Gaddafi's forces were right outside of Benghazi. He said that he was going to go house to house and kill people, so we prevented a massacre. Now the people of Libya have a transitional government. The people, I think, is very representative of the people who will be willing to take over. To have Gaddafi remain in power would mean renewal of terrorist attacks. It would mean Al-Qaeda would have a more fertile breeding ground in both areas, and it is in our interest to see Gaddafi go. And then give the responsibilities to our European allies, who have much more at stake than the Libyans do. By the way, the Transitional National Council has offered to repay us for the costs that we have incurred in helping them in their strive, in their effort to become independent.
I picked Mexico as a hypothetical because you and I have discussed Mexico before, but they haven't, quote, risen up like the people of Libya, but maybe perhaps because it is such a daunting operation, and their government is actually trying to fight the war on drugs, but they have a horrible, terrible 40,000 people killed since December '06 in the war on drugs in Mexico, the war on cartels. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, yes, they rose up, and yes, Pan Am 103, but we sort of looked the other way when Scotland released the mastermind. So a lot of Americans wonder, like, what's our goal?
Greta, remember that in Mexico, the government is in a struggle with the drug cartels. And don't forget, by the way, we're creating the demand for those drugs. But it is an intense struggle, and it's a very threat to the existence of a freely elected government. Gaddafi took power 42 years ago. Among other things, for example, there was an uprising in a prison. They went in and slaughtered 1,200 people. This guy was also responsible for other terrorist attacks around Africa and the region, not to mention the bombing of a disco, as you know, in Berlin that killed some American servicemen. So it's really, it's an apples and oranges comparison that you're making. But is it in our interest to see Gaddafi remain in power or go? I would say that the answer is pretty obvious.
I concede that Mexico and Libya are vastly different. I guess the situation, where do we spend our limited resources? How far do we go? I can't stand to see the Libyan people slaughtered. I can't stand to see the people in Mexico afraid to send their kids to school. I can't stand any of it, but we have to make decisions on how we do this, and obviously this one you feel is the right one.
If Gaddafi were able to remain in power, there's no doubt that he would be a threat to United States national security. He would be doing what he did in the past, and that's recruiting, training, and orchestrating terrorist attacks against United States embassies, against us, and other acts of terror. The Mexican government obviously is under threat, and if it collapses under the onslaught of the drug cartels, we have significant problems. But Gaddafi is a man of inestimable cruelty who has imposed on his people a terrible and brutal dictatorship. The people of Libya rose up without any of our instigation or assistance, and they were about to be slaughtered by his military. And people say, well, why don't you go into Syria? Because I don't know how you intervene in Syria. You see what I mean? There was a force in being in Tripoli, in Benghazi, that was something we could support. In Syria, it's terrible what's going on, and it's tragic. And Bashar is inflicting incredible cruelties on his people with the help of the Iranians. And that can be a threat to U.S. national security.
Coming up, can Senator John McCain fix the economy? Well, he does say he knows what's wrong with it. The two big problems the senator says we need to fix, straight ahead. Plus, who is more hated? A guy accused of trying to sell President Obama's Senate seat, or a guy who cheated on his wife while she was undergoing cancer treatment? It's a tough one, and the answer may surprise you.